The child never came home. By dusk on the 5th of January, 1937, the lamps were lit along Guildhall Street, and mothers called their children in from play. But at number 12, the door remained open, the hearth unattended. Mona Tinsley, aged 10 years, had said goodbye to her classmates at 3:30 that afternoon and started her usual walk home. It should have taken 20 minutes. What happened in those 20 minutes would shake the market town of Newark to its foundations. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you are from and what time you are watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now let us begin. It was Tuesday, the 5th of January, 1937, in the market town of Newark-on-Trent, Nottinghamshire, England. Winter cold had settled over the ancient streets, and thin smoke rose from 1,000 coal fires into the gray afternoon sky. The Great North Road carried motor lorries and horse-drawn carts through the town center, past the ruins of Newark Castle and the rows of shops that surrounded the market square. This was a place where trade and tradition moved together, where neighbors knew one another by name, and where children walked to school unaccompanied without concern. On Guildhall Street, the Methodist school released its pupils at 3:30. Among them was Mona Lillian Tinsley, a bright child of 10 years, small for her age but full of good humor and energy. She lived with her parents, Mr. Wilfred Tinsley and Mrs. Lillian Tinsley, and her 6 brothers and sisters in modest lodgings not far from the school. The walk home was familiar to her. She had made it alone many times before. The route took her past familiar doorways and shop fronts, along pavements she knew by heart. It should have taken her 20 minutes, perhaps 25 if she stopped to speak with a neighbor or watch the carts pass. But on this afternoon, Mona Tinsley did not arrive home, and by the time darkness fell across Newark, a search had begun that would not end for 5 months. The afternoon passed as afternoons do in winter. Shopkeepers swept their thresholds. Women carried parcels wrapped in brown paper. The lamplighter moved along the streets with his pole. At number 12, Mrs. Tinsley prepared the evening meal and waited for her daughter to return. By 4 o'clock, there was no concern. By 4:30, she stepped to the door and looked down the street. By 5 o'clock, worry had begun to gather in the pit of her stomach. Mr. Tinsley returned from his work. He asked where Mona was. His wife said that she had not come home from school. Together they walked to the homes of Mona's friends, knocking on doors, asking if their daughter had stopped to play. At each house they received the same answer. No one had seen her. The child had not been there. They returned home and waited. Perhaps she had gone somewhere they had not thought to look. Perhaps she would appear at any moment, breathless and apologetic. But the clock on the mantel continued its steady movement, and the door remained closed. By 7 o'clock, with the streets now dark and cold, Mr. and Mrs. Tinsley walked to the police station and reported their daughter missing. The constabulary responded at once. Officers were dispatched to search the immediate area. They walked the route between the school and the Tinsley home, calling Mona's name, looking into alleyways and behind walls. They knocked on doors and asked if anyone had seen a small girl in a blue coat walking alone that afternoon. Some remembered seeing children leaving the school. None could say with certainty that they had seen Mona Tinsley. By morning, a major search operation had been organized. Police officers were joined by more than 600 local volunteers. They searched vacant buildings and walked through fields beyond the town. They dragged the nearby canals and examined the banks of the River Trent. Divers went down into the cold water while men walked the towpaths with poles, prodding the reeds and mud. Dogs were brought in. Maps were consulted. Every street and lane within a mile of the school was walked and walked again. But no trace of the child could be found. It was as though she had simply vanished between the school gates and her own front door, swallowed by the 20 minutes of an ordinary winter afternoon. The police made public appeals. Mona's photograph appeared in the Newark Advertiser and in newspapers across the county. The description was circulated. A girl of 10 years, small for her age, wearing a blue coat and carrying her school satchel. Anyone who had seen her was urged to come forward. The telephone at the police station rang throughout the day. Officers followed every lead, no matter how uncertain. The first substantive information came from an 11-year-old boy named William Henry Plackett, who lived next door to the Tinsley family. He told police that on the afternoon of the 5th of January, he had seen Mona near the Newark bus depot in the company of a man. His description was limited. He could not say much about the man's appearance or clothing, but it was enough for officers to make inquiries at the bus station. At the same time, another resident came forward. Miss Annie Hurd contacted the police and stated that her daughter attended the same school as Mona. On the afternoon in question, she had seen a man standing in a doorway across from the school entrance. She said that she had recognized him immediately. He was a man who had once lodged with the Tinsley family. She did not know his name, but she remembered his face clearly. Another neighbor reported that she too had noticed a man loitering near the entrance of the school on Guildhall Street on the afternoon that Mona went missing. The descriptions, though not detailed, began to point in a consistent direction. Then came the testimony of Mr. Charles Revel, a bus conductor employed on the Newark to Retford route. He told officers that on the 5th of January, a man and a young girl matching Mona's description had boarded his bus at 4:45 in the afternoon. They had traveled together to Retford and had disembarked on Grove Street. The man had purchased a return ticket for himself. For the girl, he had purchased only a one-way fare. Mr. Stanley Betts, a passenger on the same bus, corroborated this account. He too had seen the man and the child sitting together. Neither witness could identify the man by name, but both were certain of what they had seen. When the police described this man to Mr. and Mrs. Tinsley grew pale. She said that by the description he sounded very much like their former lodger, a man they had known as Frederick Hudson. Mrs. Tinsley explained that Mr. Hudson had stayed with them in 1935. He had been introduced by her sister, Mrs. Edith Grimes, with whom he had previously lodged in Sheffield. During his brief stay, he had been polite and unassuming. The children had grown fond of him and called him Uncle Fred. But after a few weeks, the Tinsleys had asked him to leave, as he had failed to pay his rent. The parting had been amicable, or so she had thought. Mrs. Tinsley said that she could not imagine him doing anything to harm Mona. The police went to the home of Mrs. Edith Grimes in Sheffield. She told them that the man's real name was not Frederick Hudson, but Frederick Nodder, and that he had used a false name because he was subject to an affiliation order, a legal requirement obliging him to provide financial support for a child he had fathered. Mrs. Grimes described him as a rough man who drank heavily, maintained poor hygiene, and had few friends. He had worked as a lorry driver and a car mechanic around Retford. She claimed that she had not seen him for some time and did not know where he lived. But when the police spoke to Mrs. Grimes's neighbors, they contradicted her statement. They told officers that a man matching Mr. Nodder's description had visited her house shortly after Christmas, only a fortnight before Mona's disappearance. The police conducted inquiries at garages and haulage depots throughout Retford. They found the firm that employed him. The employer provided his current address. Mr. Nodder was living at a house called Peacehaven on Smeeth Road in the nearby village of Hayton. At 11 o'clock on the night of Thursday, the 7th of January, an officer was sent to watch the property. Shortly after, he saw Frederick Nodder walking towards the house. The officer approached him and explained that the police were making inquiries into the disappearance of a young girl named Mona Tinsley, who had failed to return home from school 2 days earlier. He showed Mr. Nodder a photograph of the missing child. Mr. Nodder denied any knowledge of her disappearance. He insisted that he knew nothing about it. When asked to account for his movements on the 5th of January, he offered a vague and unsatisfactory explanation, avoiding any clear details. Despite his repeated denials, Mr. Nodder was taken into custody and escorted to the Newark police station for further questioning. At the station, Mr. Nodder was interviewed by the chief constable, who carefully reviewed the available evidence. The bus conductor's testimony was clear. The passenger's corroboration was consistent. The neighbors had seen him near the school. The child had not been seen since she had boarded that bus with him. The chief constable contacted the director of public prosecutions to seek authorization for formal charges. After receiving the necessary approval, Frederick Nodder was charged with the abduction of Mona Tinsley. Officers were dispatched to search the property on Smeeth Road in Hayton. Near a water tank at the back of the house, they found a handkerchief that was identified as belonging to Mona. Inside the house, they discovered scraps of paper bearing a child's handwriting and drawings. On the kitchen table, they found the clear impression of a child's fingerprints. Mr. Notter continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the young girl's disappearance. Despite these denials, the police were increasingly convinced that Mona was dead. The search expanded into the surrounding countryside. Hundreds of volunteers joined the efforts. They walked through fields, looked in hedgerows, examined waterways and ditches. Newspapers nationwide printed Mona's photograph and urged anyone with information to come forward. After 3 weeks with no progress, the Chief Constable of Newark, Mr. Harry Barnes, requested assistance from Scotland Yard. On the 25th of January, Chief Inspector Leonard Burt and Detective Sergeant Scarden arrived in Hayton. They oversaw a detailed search of every building, drain, and pond within 3 miles of Mr. Notter's house. It was one of the most extensive searches in British history, yet it produced no trace of the child. Before returning to London, Chief Inspector Burt told local officers that he believed Mona's body had likely been placed in the River Idle and may have been carried downstream. He advised that every possible lead should continue to be followed. In the weeks that followed, divers repeatedly searched the river. Despite their careful and thorough efforts, no trace of Mona could be found. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now let us continue. Her parents grew increasingly anxious, watching hopelessly as each day passed without news. The local community shared in the concern and sadness. A well-known medium named Mrs. Estelle Roberts came forward to offer her assistance, on the condition that her involvement remained secret. She was sent some of Mona's clothing. Mrs. Roberts stated that the child was dead, described a house bordered by a water-filled ditch, and claimed that Mona had been strangled in an upstairs bedroom, placed in a sack, and carried to a river beyond the fields. She told officers with certainty, "You will find the child's body there." On the 9th of March, 1937, Frederick Notter stood trial at Birmingham Assizes before Mr. Justice Swift. He faced multiple charges: the abduction of Mona Tinsley, taking her by fraud with the intent to deprive her father of her custody, and unlawfully carrying away a child against her father's wishes. The prosecution was led by Mr. Norman Burkett. The defense was headed by Mr. Morris Healy. The prosecution opened by describing the disappearance of Mona Tinsley on Tuesday, the 5th of January. They stated that after the school day finished, she had started to walk home alone as she usually did. However, on that day, she never arrived. They outlined Mr. Notter's connection to the Tinsley family, stating that the children had referred to him as Uncle Fred. They stated that on the day of the young girl's disappearance, Mr. Notter was seen traveling with a child on a bus from Newark to Retford, and that he had purchased a one-way ticket for the child and a return ticket for himself. Mrs. Maggie Simpson, Mr. Mona's funeral took place on the 10th of June, 1937, at her local Methodist church, where she had faithfully attended Sunday school. The service was attended by family, friends, and members of the community. Several hundred people lined the streets, standing in silence as her coffin was carried from the church to Newark Cemetery. Flowers were laid by mourners along the route, and many in the crowd were visibly moved, reflecting the deep sense of loss felt throughout the town. Frederick Notter was charged with murder. The second trial opened on the 2nd of November, 1937, at the court in Nottingham. The prosecution was again led by Mr. Norman Burkett. The defense was again headed by Mr. Morris Healy. This time, Frederick Notter decided to give evidence in his own defense. He repeated the same story he had told at the time of his arrest, insisting that he had last seen Mona when he put her on a bus bound for Sheffield. He denied any involvement in her death. The prosecution called the bus conductor, Mr. Charles Revel, who confirmed that Mr. Notter had purchased a return ticket for himself, but only a one-way fare for the child. Expert testimony came from the distinguished pathologist, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, who explained that Mona had been strangled from behind with a cord or bootlace. The marks on her neck and the deep bite wounds on her tongue indicated that she had struggled desperately during the attack. The trial lasted only 2 days. The jury deliberated for just over an hour before finding Mr. Nodder guilty of murder. He showed little emotion, though there was a faint, almost resigned smile on his face as the verdict was pronounced. When asked if he wished to say anything before sentence was passed, he replied in a quiet voice, "I shall go out of this court with a clear conscience." Frederick Nodder was then sentenced to death. His defense team attempted to overturn the sentence, arguing that the evidence was entirely circumstantial. The appeal was heard on the 13th of December 1937, but was denied. 17 days later, on the 30th of December 1937, Frederick Nodder was hanged at Lincoln Prison. He never admitted to murdering Mona Tinsley. The case prompted discussions about child safety and the supervision of young children walking alone. Newspapers questioned whether more precautions should be taken. Communities became more vigilant. Parents held their children closer. But time passed, as time does, and the name of Mona Tinsley faded from daily conversation. The market square in Newark continued its trade. The castle ruins stood silent over the streets, and somewhere in the records of Nottinghamshire, bound in leather and sealed with dust, the depositions and evidence remain, a monument to a winter afternoon when a child of 10 years started to walk home and never arrived.